This is Kent Blackhurst, and in this segment of The Followers of Jesus Christ, I'm covering my views of the place of UFOs, or UAPs, within a gospel perspective. Now, I understand that there are a lot of Christians who completely discount the possibility that extraterrestrials even exist because they don't fit into their biblical paradigm. Notwithstanding, other Christian scholars cite Ezekiel 1:4, where it says, "And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, and a great cloud and a fire unfolding itself, and a brightness was about it. And out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire." And then, in verse 16 of the same chapter, Ezekiel describes the appearance of what might be a spacecraft with two wheels containing unearthly inhabitants who have a mission to give Ezekiel instruction to speak to the rebellious Israelites as to why they were brought into captivity for their disobedience. Then again, others might cite 2 Kings, where it is said, "Behold, there appeared a chariot of fire, and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven." So, even from a biblical perspective, some have interpreted events as descriptions of what today we might classify as unidentified anomalous phenomena. So, whatever camp you might fall into, I hope to impart some new insights that I've only recently gained into how they might fit into a Christian perspective. Their sightings fall into two camps. One storyline is that extraterrestrials exist, and they are part of Heavenly Father's family of worlds that He created, and they are peaceful beings that are to help this world to succeed, starting afresh under the reign of Jesus Christ. Another storyline is that there have been secret societies where evil men have purposefully downed alien vehicles in order to reverse engineer many of their technologies. And this cabal has covered their existence up, created a disinformation program, and developed a plan to create fear in the world so that humankind might unite under a single world order in order to combat evil aliens who have come to destroy the earth. I know. All of this sounds a bit kooky, but I'd like to share a few clips from interviews that Dr. Stephen Greer did. I will post the links of the interviews below so that you can watch them in their entirety. There are 5 hours of questions addressed, which I feel, if viewed, could be very enlightening. I will play various clips from these interviews and then give my perspective of what this means to Christians and what we can still do to eliminate this secret society before it becomes too late. To give some background, for most of my life, I relegated the UFO phenomena as something I would just need to put on the back shelf because there were just too many contradictory viewpoints as to what these phenomena represented. I reserved not to think much about ETs because there just wasn't anything concrete enough for me to create any rational opinion that would make sense as a firm believer of Jesus Christ's gospel. However, recently I've felt compelled to investigate UFOs or UAPs when I heard the news earlier this year that whistleblower David Grush was to report intelligence that he'd gathered before Congress as to what he had uncovered. Now, what are his credentials? Well, according to Wikipedia, from 2019 to 2021, Grush was a representative of the NRO to the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. From late 2021 to July 2022, He was the co-lead for UAP analysis at the NGA and its representative to the task force. He assisted in drafting the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023, which includes provisions for reporting UFOs, including whistleblower protections and exemptions to non-disclosure orders and agreements. Congressional interest in UFO sightings immediately prior to Grush's public claims surrounded questions about the 4 objects that the Air Force brought down in February of 2023. For me, this seemed like a credible witness that extraterrestrials visiting might be plausible. However, the jury was still out, and I'd need to investigate things a whole lot more to convince me. So, even though I wasn't ready to say that there has been a governmental cover-up, I also couldn't give an opinion that there wasn't. But I, like many others, would be interested to see how things unfold truthfully. In July 2023, a defense authorization bill had an amendment introduced by Charles Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, to require that the federal government collect and make public all records related to unidentified anomalous or aerial phenomena, UAPs, and unidentified flying objects, UFOs. This requires that the National Archives and Records Administration create a collection of records on UAPs and UFOs to be disclosed to the public immediately, unless a review board provides reasons to keep them classified. There is a 6-month whistleblower clause that would give immunity to anyone willing to give testimony or affidavits to uncover these black ops. After that, any organization or company that does not disclose what they have will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law for treason. A UFO disclosure project led by Dr. Stephen Greer has already been sent into the Senate committee, and it contains a few terabytes of information naming 145 top secret UAP project facilities, 755 eyewitness accounts attesting to the existence of UAP projects in the said facilities, and proof of 121 UFO UAP crash retrievals that have been recovered in hopes of reverse engineering those technologies. The intent of this video is to inform you of Dr. Greer's point of view, the things that have been going on over the past 7 decades. He comes off as being very credible, and if what he says is truthful, then we need to evaluate it. My intention in sharing this information is to demonstrate that if these things are true, they should certainly be evaluated from a Christian perspective. And I'd like to show how this knowledge could strengthen our faith in Jesus Christ. Now, before I get into Dr. Greer's various statements, let's watch an excerpt from President Eisenhower's last speech before President Kennedy took office in January 1961. This demonstrates the admission of the time that the President of the United States lost control of any oversight to the industrial military complex. In other words, this represents the beginning of the formation of a covert, unlawful government, or a secret society built solely to accumulate wealth and to potentially subvert current lawful governments so that they might eventually usurp power from them, so that these few unlawful renegades might rule all.
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. we have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals.
With this background, I'm going to have Sean Ryan give the introduction of Dr. Stephen Greer. From there, we will go on to their interview so that we can see some of the insights that he has uncovered over the last 30 years of looking into UFO phenomena.
Dr. Stephen Greer is one of the world's foremost authorities on the subject of UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, and exotic technologies. For more than 30 years, Dr. Greer has provided briefings for senior government officials across the globe, conducted numerous media interviews, and delivered hundreds of lectures. He has written 5 books and produced 4 feature film documentaries that have been seen by hundreds of millions of people. He is currently working on a documentary scheduled for release in late 2023 called The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. The documentary addresses how energy solutions have been suppressed in the past and how they could now come out for the benefit of all mankind using an open source strategy.
Let's go into the interview.
What I discovered, and this was a very strange thing from 93 to now. Every time I take a meeting with a high-level member of the U.S. government who should know about this given their rank or their position. For example, when I briefed years ago, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Patrick Hughes, a 3-star. Well, as anyone knows who's been in the military, that position is the top of the food chain for military intelligence, period. It's and the DIA is like the CIA for civilian. It's military. He had completely been denied access.
The director of the DIA is completely denied access.
I had a multi-hour meeting with him in his office with my senior folks. And it was another, see, these data points, people remember them as I go through them. How, in what universe can the head of the DIA or the CIA or the president or the chair people of armed services in the Senate or in the Select Committee on Intelligence not have been read in on this? When we are funding it, we estimate there's somewhere over the last 70 years, $8 to $10 trillion that have gone into these projects that are unaccounted for. Remember, the day before 9/11, we have a videotape of Rumsfeld at the Pentagon. I'm not sure he knew it was being recorded because I'm shocked that he said it. He says,
according to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And now this is now 21, 22 years ago. Trillion, not billion. Let me give you an example.
I believe it.
They say, it costs $2 billion a plane to make the B-2 stealth. It's about $150 million. The rest of it goes through the back door into these unsanctioned projects that neither the president nor the Congress knows. Never mind the American people. Multiply that across the whole system. So we'll get into this in a moment. There are other more creative ways of this organization, this secret, illegal organization. I view this group that's doing this as the world's largest RICO, racketeering influence corrupt organization, like a mafia. But they become pretty much untouchable till now. And I'm not saying we need to go after them aggressively in a negative way, but it needs to be disclosed. And we need to have the people's representatives and the constitutional government at least informed about it, and they are not. The thing that's most shocking to me, even to this day, is that every time I take a meeting with this, and you're meeting with someone of that rank, like the General Hughes, here's a 3-star in charge of DIA. It was so crazy that he's sitting there, and we start talking, and he had made inquiries through the chain of command of DIA. He says, the only thing I've gotten, he goes over to it in his conference room for the general. I had a bookshelf, and there was a little, corny little like E.T. doll, like you'd see at a toy store. Mm-hmm. And he grabs it. He says, this is all I've gotten for my inquiries through the channels. He's in a rage. I said, and I was going, yes, sir, this has happened to most of your folks who are in your position, unless they were brought in and came up through the ranks because they were identified as sociopaths who would break the law and run an unsanctioned illegal operation for decades. There's your criteria. So all of you guys listening, and women, who if you have been involved with this, you're not culpable because you're not at that policy-making level where you are willfully insubordinate to the Constitution, which, everyone takes an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Writ large domestic here. Because the worst treasonous acts that have ever happened to any country that falls is from within.
Yep.
So that's what we're talking about here. So I want to be very clear about it. I know I'm coming on a little bit strong on it, but I am so outraged after dealing with this for 30 years and seeing this drag on. So what my concern is that now that this law is in place, and it's only a month and a half on, right? We need to move expeditiously, quickly through that door that's opened. Because who knows when someone may slam it shut.
There have been many prophecies and traditions in the world that give warnings to people in the last days about what they can do to ward off judgments upon the human family. In the 65th episode of the Sean Ryan Show, they got into the Hopi prophecy.
Completely unrelated to that.
Yep.
The Hopi prophecy.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because the time we live in, many people feel many ancient peoples and even scriptures related to the time of sort of the ending of one whole era and the opening of another. And I think that's the truth. I think we're at this point of transition between an old world and a new one. Now, some people say it's the end of the world. I said, no, it's the end of the old world and the opening of a new one. So in the Hopi prophecy, the Hopi prophecy rock, there's one line that terminates, and that's our civilization terminating if we don't get this right. There's another one where it takes off and it goes off into infinity. So it's like humanity, as I see it, is at this critical juncture where we need to choose whether we're going to go forward and keep going for hundreds of thousands of years and go out into space peacefully, all of it, or we're going to blow the whole system and have a terminal situation. So the Hopis had this in their prophecy.
Who are the Hopis?
There's a Native American tribe in the desert Southwest.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Many people around the world get this sense that we're at this inflection point, not just politics and this and what have you, but our whole civilization. And I think these extraterrestrial civilizations know that. They know that we could get into a lot of bad trouble and have things happen that will be extinction level events if we're not careful. On the other hand, they know that if we came together and were, for once in our history, did the right thing peacefully, we could transition to a civilization that literally will be interstellar. Maybe not in my lifetime, but in probably your children's.
Do you have hope? You think we're going to get there?
Oh, I do. I wouldn't be doing this if I were a pessimist. I mean, I think it's going to be a bumpy ride. I mean, a smooth transition would have been before I was born, when the ETs warned Truman and Eisenhower to make the transition. But I think absolutely we can do it.
In the Book of Mormon, Moroni editorialized about what those in the last days should look out for. He called them secret combinations. Now, in the 19th century dictionaries, the word combinations had the connotation of a specific society of people. Thus, a secret combination referred to a secret society. In Ether 8:24 through 26, it says, "Wherefore the Lord commandeth you, when ye shall see these things come among you, that ye shall awake to the sense of your awful situation, because of this secret combination which shall be among you. Or woe be unto it because of the blood of them who have been slain, for they cry from the dust for vengeance upon it, and also upon those who built it up. For it cometh to pass that whoso buildeth it up seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries, and it bringeth to pass the destruction of all people, for it is built up by the devil, who is the father of all lies, even that same liar who beguiled our first parents, yea, even that same liar who hath caused man to commit murder from the beginning, who hath hardened the hearts of men, that they have murdered the prophets, and stoned them, and cast them out from the beginning. Wherefore I, Moroni, am commanded to write these things, that evil may be done away, and that the time may come that Satan may have no power upon the hearts of the children of men, but that they may be persuaded to do good continually, that they may come unto the fountain of all righteousness and be saved." Let's go back to the interview and learn more about how this group operates.
We actually mastered gravity control in October 1954. One of the members of my team for many years was in the vault. He was the top scientist at the Naval Research Labs, a very large Department of Defense lab in D.C. there. I'd been in there, and he saw the documentation for this. So, and I think what the public, and this is true of the senators and the congressmen and the White House, they are not read in to these other projects. They simply aren't. You know, I had a friend of Trump's tell me over this past weekend that he said, they just don't tell us much or anything, or very little. So I think that these sort of operations, as Eisenhower warned, have just gotten out of constitutional legal oversight. So I call those the illegal secret government projects. But those are in the Lockheed Skunk Works. So there's facilities out in the desert. If you go out to the Mojave Desert, there's a facility and an underground opening. So the really sensitive facilities are all in underground skiffs or DUMBs, deep underground military base facilities. And that whole area of California is like a beehive connected underneath with tunnels.
Okay.
I know where they are. I know people who've worked in them. Now remember,
Are those all Lockheed?
No, because those are actually built by Bechtel Corporation or HIT Construction. There are a few contractors who build these underground connectors. And for years, they used a nuclear-powered tunneling device that would go through bedrock and just glassify it. So you'd have a connecting tunnel between, say, Edwards Air Force Base and Nellis Range. And you never have to go above the surface. So I'm very familiar with these and where they're located, and I've debriefed a number of guys who've been on them. So it's all part of let's call it a coalition of operations that are corporate, contractor, and governmental, but governmental as in off the reservation of legal oversight and constitutional requirements. This is why the Senate and the House are moving quickly to get this under control, because about a year and a half ago, we were providing enough information that they now realize that this is real, that the UAPs, UFOs are real, and they're beginning to realize that a bunch of them are ours, but they're being used in deceptive indications and warnings, meaning false flag operations. So this, of course, is the topic I brought up to the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Patrick Hughes, way back in the late 90s. I said, look, you guys are being completely zoomed and deceived by some of these objects you think might be extraterrestrial, but they're ours. So Lockheed has some of those.
Let's talk about...
Raytheon has a very, a certain type of them. Usually they're trapezoidal or triangular. My uncle worked for his whole career at Northrop Grumman. They have ones that are large, triangular, and other shapes. But so many of these objects that people think they see a UFO, well, it's a UFO to them because they don't know how to identify it. So one of the things we're doing is juxtaposing an interstellar vehicle, extraterrestrial vehicle, with a man-made one, and what are the characteristics and differences? Because operationally and tactically, the Pentagon and the White House and Congress need to know this. Otherwise, they're sitting ducks to be deceived by all manner of nonsense.
These objects are probably some kind of secret military program, and what these pilots saw were real. They saw them, and they filmed and photographed them, and the Pentagon, I'm assuming, declassified them because there was a lot of speculation going out there. They had already been leaked, so why not come out and say, okay, these films are genuine, they do exist, but we don't know what they are.
Who are the other players? So we got Lockheed, Skunk Works, we got Raytheon, we got Northrop Grumman. Is Boeing involved in this? Yes,
there's a division of Boeing that absolutely is involved. General Motors has traditionally, and Ford, and General Electric for sure, and EG&G. EG&G is a major player in this space, as well as Raytheon and TRW. Booz Allen Hamilton has an aspect that deals with this problem.
So are these, and then there was the construction company who's building these underground facilities.
The Bechtel Corporation and HIT Construction.
So are these companies competing with each other?
They do get into competing bids. It's a very interesting story. One of my whistleblowers who's still too afraid to come forward, that I've dealt with for about 7 years, was 10 years in the Pentagon and worked in a very classified operation deep underneath the Pentagon. And he was read in across 18 of these unacknowledged SAPs, unacknowledged special access projects, dealing with this issue. And one of the things that happened there was a 3-star general that was brought into near Fort Sill, Oklahoma, at Lawton. And there was a skiff, an underground facility where we had downed an extraterrestrial vehicle. And this general brought an unauthorized person who was his girlfriend, who was a Booz Allen Hamilton executive, so that she could see what they were studying, so her group would get a leg up on the competing contract to study how those objects cloak or disappear and reappear. And he was actually CID, Criminal Investigative Division, after having been a mainline military. And I know the general's name. We have all this. It's been handed over to the investigators for the U.S. government. But he ended up being demoted a star, but he was never prosecuted because the Department of Justice was blocked from being able to gain access to what it was that he did, because the projects don't exist. I mean, this is gets into very complicated legal and SecOps, the whole security around these operations. But because of the extreme level of secrecy, the big problem with the public and the media is they think you're president, you're chair of this Senate committee and what have you, and that there's this vast conspiracy of these kind of people lying to the American public. It's the opposite. They're actually victims, most of them. Now, there are a few devils. I'll be quite blunt. I'm not going to name them. There are a few devils in the government, we know who they are, who are sort of embedded operatives to basically gaslight and deceive members of Congress or people in the White House or what have you. And because they have sort of an all-access pass, they can put themselves in positions of authority, but their authority is based on deceiving the constitutional leadership of the U.S. government. The universe, let's call it the cosmos, it's described by astrophysicists as sort of this 3D thing. Now, if you look at quantum entanglement and the concepts of the universe being a holographic conscious entity, which it is, then you start talking about not just material, but you're also talking about other dimensions that are at refined levels of frequencies and vibration. So the speed of light, the speed of electrons, atoms, what have you, all of that would pertain to what we call the 3D, three-dimensional. If you were to cross over that in frequencies, and this is, again, where you start getting into some very strange WSFM, like I mentioned, phenomenon, then you're talking about other embedded dimensions, but it's not like it's some distant place, it's folded within. So, a hologram, if you look at a hologram of Marilyn Monroe with her dress blowing up, like that, if you were to just zoom in on one little piece of that dress on the edge of her skirt, and zoom in on it, the entire image would be in there, and zoom in again, it's holographic. So you have to kind of get your mind around the cosmos is this conscious quantum hologram. And so there are many, many, many dimensions, not just this plane of 3-dimension, that is all enfolded within it. So a lot of the confusion happens where everything like something weird, like a poltergeist event, will be conflated with something extraterrestrial. Well, it isn't. It was someone who, like in the ER, I had this happen once, some guy that was killed, couldn't save him, it was murder, and he was angry, and at 3 a.m, he started taking all the stuff out of the cabinets. But he wasn't there, it was just his spirit. Weird stuff. So that kind of phenomenon isn't extraterrestrial, it's interdimensional. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay, so I'm trying to do some very kind of crude analogies, but the confusion comes in is that if you're an interstellar capable civilization, which means you're going from point A in the cosmos to here, B, it's like if this were a piece of paper, you're not going a straight line across the paper, you're folding the paper, being space-time.
Okay.
And so these 2 points are here.
I'm enlightened now.
And so, but in the process of doing that, this sort of bending and altering space-time, you then bump up against and cross these other dimensions. And this is sort of the intersection between what some people call metaphysics and physics, or the conscious worlds and the worlds of light, if you will, the mystics would call astral, and extraterrestrial technologies. And it's a very interesting intersection. I find that the most interesting part of this whole subject, but it quickly, you have to be, you go in the crazy town way too quickly with a lot of people out there who don't know enough to talk about it intelligently, in my opinion. But it's also dangerous, and here's why it's dangerous. Those capabilities can be technologically stimulated to occur. It's like the Skinwalker Ranch. After a certain cell of this covert group got hold of that thing, they started setting up phenomena there. It was absolutely man-made, high-end electronics, but interdimensional. It's like the show Stranger Things. I've never seen it, but that's based on some weird stuff that went on at Montauk on eastern Long Island, the Montauk projects. And we know what those are. I know guys who've been in laboratories where they have a toroid or one of these devices, and suddenly they're pulling in spooky-looking creatures that look like they came out of the ninth ring of hell, and they literally become 3D and are running around the lab. Weird stuff. All right, so the high end of the WSFM is this sort of thing, but that can be used in a deceptive indication and warning. It can be used in a way that everyone on planet Earth would think that it's alien, and it isn't.
I see what you mean.
Okay, so this is the real danger in all of this not being disclosed and known, particularly by policymakers and the government and Pentagon and all these folks, is that they're going to be so easily gaslit and deceived by people presenting all kinds of phenomena, plural, as extraterrestrial when it isn't. Because they have mastered the ability of this, what's called stagecraft. That's literally what it's called in some circles. And this gets back to this whole question of Project Bluebeam, where they could stage. But what their capabilities are way beyond what most people think they are. And I began working with some of these geniuses back in the early 90s that I met who in late 1950s and 60s had figured this out. So the electronics and the very high-end electromagnetic field systems that can do this were unpacked pretty well by between 1955 and 1965, in that a decade.
So with the different dimensions, there's another dimension in this room right now, and we just can't.
Within this room, folded, it's the enfoldment, it's quantum entanglement. So, you know what Einstein called the spooky effect, you know, where the same particle be in two places at once. Mm-hmm. But visualize that at every point in space and time, at this level of quantum entanglement, you have access to any other point in space and time, but also these other dimensions, up to and including the most rarefied, what some people would call the conscious being, the unbounded consciousness. It's all folded within this in what I call the real cosmology, understanding the cosmology, which is way beyond astrophysics, current astrophysics. But I think that's the part of this where when you start experimenting with and reverse engineering an extraterrestrial vehicle, their communication systems are not based on the speed of light like our cell phones, right, or video. They're based on this understanding of the cosmos because they've lived for millennia in that understanding. And so this is why, you know, we talk about the fact that they have technologies that interface with directed thought. I call it technology-assisted consciousness, and consciousness that assists the technology, so they can interface bioelectric field and thought, and they navigate the spacecraft. Really, really cool stuff. I mean, you know, Elon Musk is trying to do some stuff with Neuralink, but he's still using wires and at the speed of light. But the idea would be the same, that your thought could actuate to a technological interface that would then not only be used in communication, because what's that? The speed of thought versus the speed of light.
Yeah.
But think about why that's so important. If you're from the Andromeda galaxy, which is 2.5 million light years from here, at the speed of light, your cell phone, it would take 2.5 million years for a signal to get there, and another 2.5 million years for them to answer, and you hear it. It's 5 million years. So when I talk about this, I say there are certain technological thresholds you have to have crossed if you're an extraterrestrial interstellar civilization. The good news is we understand them, and they could be used to great purpose on Earth. Energy generation, healing, all kinds of things, medical. But right now, they're in the hands of the worst group of sociopaths that have ever lived, and they dwarf, by far, Stalin or Hitler in terms of their intention and their capabilities, way beyond. It's not the buffoonery of the Third Reich. It's just the high-tech, very dangerous end. Now, this to me is, as a doctor, I tell people this is like a knife, or so, you know, I can use a knife to put butter on my bread, or I can use it to slit your throat. Now, so technology is neutral. It's the consciousness and the intention of those who wield it, who have it. Mm-hmm. In this situation right now, it's the worst of all worlds, because you have the most amazing, wonderful technologies in the hands of the worst group ever, that have quite a bit of malice and intention. So this is what I think has to be fixed, and that's why the Disclosure Project is trying to move this along. First, yes, now we've established UFOs are real. Well, that was known in the 50s, 60s, 40s. But now what's behind all that? Unpacking all the detail. And the reason the scientific end of this is so important, even for operations, is that this group of illegal covert human projects, they have surveillance, communication systems, transport systems, and sciences that are. Ben Rich, the week before he died, told James Goodall, you heard him at our conference, one of the last men to talk to him. He says, anything that you've seen in Star Trek and can imagine we've done at the Lockheed Skunk Works. And he said, not at Area 51, but at the desert base, the underground facility.
Let's ask ourselves a question. Why would any group keep reverse engineered technology, as far as aviation and advanced weaponry are concerned, out of the purview of the United States President, who is the military's commander-in-chief? And why would a secret society not allow the Pentagon, the defense and intelligence heads, nor the U.S. Congress to know what they have at their disposal to evaluate a potential military conflict? There are only two reasons that I can think of. First, either these technologies don't exist, which, with the mounting evidence being produced, no longer can support that claim, or second, it's because they've developed a shadow government waiting for the ideal opportunity to strike and take over not only our government, but probably all other governments upon the earth. Let's investigate this a little further.
So there are all manner, there's a whole constellation again of sciences and technologies, and the CIA science and technology guys, I've met with some of them, that are so far beyond what, let's call it the white world, the legal government, including Lockheed, Northrop Grumman. My uncle never worked on this stuff. He worked on the lunar module, landed on the moon the first time. That was my mom's oldest brother. And his whole career was with Northrop Grumman. He was never read into this other end of it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things people have to keep in mind, most of the people in the military, CIA, special operations, corporate, what have you, who work in that world are not part of some vast conspiracy. It's incredibly tightly held. In my view, that's their Achilles heel. By definition, it has to be kept pretty small, pretty tight, which makes them vulnerable if, we'll get to this later, if the U.S. government actually has the will to go the distance to get this under control. And they need to get it under control fairly quickly because it's getting out of hand. Just to make this real for people, when I was briefing years ago, the admiral in charge of J2 intelligence for Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Wilson, and that memo leaked out where he was debriefed by Dr. Davis. And it states, I was there for a stand-up briefing, and what they don't know is that at the end of it, I asked the admiral to help us get to, and this is 97, this is 26 years ago. And he said, well, I don't know how I'm going to help with something when the best technology we can deploy is a B-2 stealth. And this other group have objects that can do circles around the B-2s. And he acknowledged that to me. I said, well, that doesn't mean you can't. He says, well, I can't unless it's authorized. I said, well, where do you need the authorization? Well, he felt he needed authorization from the SecDef, who had already been waived off, and the president, which was Clinton at the time. But we knew that Clinton had been approached by George H.W. Bush and told, butt out, this is none of your business, dealing with the UFO issue. Because this was one of the very first things Clinton wanted to know about, because I knew people who lived at the White House with him. He was very keen on getting to the bottom of it, but the efforts he launched were torpedoed, and he eventually backed off of it. And there was an entire special operation stood up around getting that. But I have a very famous Hollywood agent and a superstar who was in a limo with, they don't want me to use their names, with Clinton after he left office. And they asked about the UFO issue, and the president said, oh, yes. He says, but I was told by George H.W. Bush that this was none of my business and butt out. And it was made very clear. You're only the president. You get the drift. So, now, obviously, if we're going to have a constitution, the rule of law, and a democratic republic, that kind of thing cannot stand. But because of the power and the money behind this group, it has stood. And, years ago in 93, I was at the Wrigley Mansion, and I'll tell you, Sean, it was a very interesting meeting. It was like late at night, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and it was a conference room full of suits. And they approached me, and this is the fall of 93. Just before I briefed CIA Director Woolsey. And they knew all about this meeting that was going to happen. You don't need to be talking to the president and the CIA director about this. They don't know anything, and they're not going to know anything. If you want to know, you talk to us. We're the WFO. We're the work for other contractors. We're the people who are working on these technologies and doing the technology transfer. And then they were trying to convince me to side with what they were doing. And I said, no. I said, this is a corrupt enterprise. And then he says, you're a doctor, you can take out as many credit cards as you want. We'll zero them out each month because we run the supercomputers that back up the entire banking system. And we can get an infinite amount of money through certain techniques. And so we'll just zero them out. I said, then you're going to own me, aren't you? Because isn't that credit card fraud and banking fraud? He says, no, we're just trying to help. You see how these, this is an absolutely true story. He put me under sodium pentothal lie detector. But at the end of it, he said, look, now remember, this is 30 years ago. We have given at least 10,000 people $10 million apiece or more to secure their cooperation with this project.
Wow.
And that was 30 years ago. Now, money is no object if you're printing the stuff up and you're running drugs and you're trafficking and you're siphoning off from the legitimate black budget, which there is a legitimate black budget that's overseen by the president and the key people in the Congress. We're totally legitimate. But a lot of money from that is siphoned off and is through overbilling to the government into these illegal projects. It's absolutely embezzlement. So we can prove this, by the way, and I have people who've seen it happen, okay? But I think that when you look at that and you go, okay, well, this is where the center of power is. The center of power is not in Congress, and it's not in the White House, and it's not in the legal constitutional government or the main part of the Pentagon or agency. It's in this group, and it's amassed so much power and wealth and technology that it is, and I'll be blunt, a threat to all life on Earth. It's a threat. It's way greater threat than China or Iran or Russia, ever. And I think people have to take this, what I just said, very seriously, because all these other skirmishes, even if there were a couple nukes detonated, is nothing compared to the risk this group poses, given the technologies they possess and the intention to use it in a malevolent way, where they could stampede the whole world onto a trajectory that would be, you know, an Armageddon scenario. So unfortunately, these people are serious about it. They're whacked out, in my opinion. One of the NOC I recently met with, he says, yeah, well, even in this world, that he's been in this super black, dark world, and very high up, relatively high up, mid-level anyway. And he said the way, for the folks who are these really super rogue operators, they're recruited for being sociopaths or psychopaths. Now, he says, I was recruited because I was willing to kill on behalf of the country or what's right, but not being a sociopath, to do it for the good, if you're going to use lethal force or any technology. These folks running these projects are a subset of people who are screened who are, in fact, sociopaths and psychopaths. And I'm using this clinically as a doctor. There's 4.5% of the U.S. population are sociopaths and psychopaths. So, I mean, and the ones that are high functioning are identified and moved over into these rogue operations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We're going to change gears to talk about some of the black ops this cabal has been involved in.
I would say 90% of people who study UFOs got gaslit. Certainly the U.S. Congress and the media did. So they're very good at doing it. It doesn't mean that it's right, but I'd be very happy to go tete-a-tete on that with anybody.
Let's talk about the Stargate program. A lot of questions about the Stargate program. Can you enlighten us?
Well, you'd have to describe it. That name is not a code word that I've been introduced to from a reliable inside source person who knows.
Okay.
So here's, just to give you an idea of my discipline.
Well, I appreciate the honesty. Thank you.
So if somebody has told me about an operation, whether it's a code word, code numbered, or just a general project that I know has the credentials and we know he was involved directly, firsthand, not second, third, fourth hand gossip over the internet, then I will speak to that. But now if you describe to me what people think Stargate is, I can comment on whether it's got any legitimacy.
Well, from what I've read, people are saying that the Stargate program is doing some kind of experimentation with kids.
Oh, well, I mean, it has a different name, but absolutely that's true. And as you know, Mr. Herrera, the Marine who was at our conference, he came across such an operation. He initially thought they were transporting in this man-made UFO drugs. They certainly had weapons, illegal weapons that they were distributing. But those crates that our forensic aerospace artist drew, or we had a knock who was there, who had been involved in an operation after that. And those were transporting children and women and certain men who had certain capabilities that would be used in experimental projects here and in other countries. It's a monstrous program. There's a man who lives right near here who was a CIA operative and was very young, was one of these victims of this. And he wants to come forward, but he's quite frightened. He's already signed affidavits about it. But there's a CIA black site 160, not far from Nashville, that was involved in some of these operations, mostly drugs and drug running, but also trafficking.
So it's a human trafficking operation. It's part of Stargate.
Yeah, but you have to understand what it's for. I have to say, some of these projects, I mean, they're very disturbing. And I don't know how much people want to hear this, but
they want to hear it.
It will keep you awake at night. I mean, if you have children like I do. But they're used in very specific operations, and they're selected for certain capabilities, particularly psi capabilities. Okay. And those are used in projects that these illegal projects are running for the purpose of communication.
So what's coming to my mind right now is remote viewing.
Yes.
Is that involved in this?
But in a very high-tech way, technologically. Most of the subjects die as a consequence of what they're made to do. But they have certain aptitudes and abilities for which they are screened, and then they are abducted and taken. Now, keep in mind, this is also, there are a lot of operations that are related to this. Recently there was a whistleblower came out talking about the aliens murdering humans, and he was referring to a case that I know for a fact were our operations, these illegal secret government operations that were down in South America, and they've done it in Africa also, where they have killed innocent people in villages to make it look like an alien attack. Now that information is being now provided to Congressman Tim Burchett and the Senate Intelligence Committee as if those were extraterrestrial events. They have no idea it's our guys doing it. Here's the risk, though, and if anyone in Congress is watching, I want to word this very carefully. A little knowledge is an extremely dangerous thing here, because this is a hall of smoke and mirrors and deception, and you have to then wind this back. What would a clandestine operation have if unsupervised since the late 1950s, where they've had some of the most brilliant scientific minds I've ever met working these projects? They've had almost an infinite amount of money, trillions of dollars that have gone into the R&D, studying both human breakthroughs and also extraterrestrial vehicles, propulsion systems, communication systems, material science, what things are made of, how they're made. Well, you figure after 80 years of that and trillions of dollars, you're going to have some payoffs. And these payoffs are in the form of advanced advanced technologies, and ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles that are the man-made ones, but also this whole area of nanobiotechnology, consciousness and mind interface technologies, all manner of weapon systems that are what are called scalar or longitudinal, go faster than the speed of light. It's like an EMP, but on steroids. It has, instead of a wave like this for electromagnetic, it's a straight line that goes out longitudinally, called scalar. And those are faster than the speed of light. And they can be used for interstellar communications, but they can also be weaponized.
Let's talk about Project Bluebeam. Can you describe what that is?
Well, that's another subculture term that's been attached to a series of projects that involve what the Pentagon, what they call a deceptive indication and warning, or a false INW, which is a false flag. And it's the ability to stage, through very advanced technologies, an alien attack or an alien event. And it's a whole series of them. Now, what most people don't know about, since late 50s, early 60s, like the Barney Hill case and all that, those were all human assets abducting innocent people made to look alien. And so that psychological warfare was authorized in 1953, 54. 1954, we mastered gravity control. So we started deploying these assets to begin to condition the public that there's a scary threat from outer space. I mean, look at Hollywood, Alien, Ridley Scott's the movies. If you want to see a script for what's coming fairly soon, look at the movie Independence Day. Okay. It's right at a central casting for this covert group. So what their whole purpose is to create sort of a global militarized totalitarian superstate of the world fighting another world. It's like War of the Worlds. Okay. And that's been a 70-year defense plan. And I know people who've seen that plan. Carol Rosin saw the plan, who is Werner von Braun's spokesperson, who's on our team. And she's almost 80 now, but brilliant mind. And, when she realized in the 70s that this was what was afoot, her whole life was devoted to trying to get some of these projects under control. But where little David's up against an enormous Goliath.
When von Braun talked to me about this faked extraterrestrial, he called it a faked alien invasion that was being planned. I saw on a board a list of countries against whom we were going to build space-based weapons. I called Wesley Clark, and he answered the phone. And I said, well, what is it about? And he said, well, I asked that question. What is it about? And the guy at the desk said, I don't know.
I said, we're going to war with Iraq. Why? He said, I don't know.
In its paper, published in 2000, Rebuilding America's Defenses, the neoconservative think tank Project for the New American Century asserted that only a, quote, new Pearl Harbor would generate the political will for the military and defense policy transformations the group desired. Indeed, these traumatizing events are always planned or hijacked in order to manipulate perception and manufacture consent for military action and the theft of our wealth and liberty.
When George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and others had decided to go to war with Iraq long before Colin Powell gave that presentation, I feel like it was the lowest point in my professional and personal life that I had a hand in managing it.
But we've come a long way since the 9/11 attacks. That same document that called for a new Pearl Harbor goes on to describe how we need to put weapons in space, and even predicts the creation of the Space Force. For a complete fascist takeover, the men behind the curtain will have to play their final card, a cosmic 9/11.
This temptation to generate a false flag attack on the part of some extraterrestrial civilization, you even hear people like Ronald Reagan make reference to it.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Wouldn't it be clear if we all of a sudden found ourselves being attacked by an extraterrestrial civilization? We'd finally all come together. Wouldn't that be really lovely? Well, it's not really lovely for the industrial state. They don't want to lose their other enemies first. They want to use up all that before they go to that extreme.
The last card was the most profound experience I had in my whole life, and I accepted the mission. And until Stephen Greer picked me up and talked me into going to the Disclosure Project, when I had just about given up, That's when I saw that there were other witnesses to what's going on, to the truth, to the facts.
When she told me what Werner von Braun had said, it didn't surprise me because I had previously met with a number of people in the defense industry and in the intelligence community who had already told me that there was such a plan and that it could be actuated at any moment. And that was one of the long-term agendas was keep the technologies away so we can maintain our industrial base of fossil fuel and all this. When we're ready to pull the trigger on releasing this information, spin it in the direction that benefits the foxes guarding the henhouse, the people holding these secrets. But it was interesting to hear that all the way back in the early 70s that he had been warning her about this. And we know that those systems were developed in the late 40s and 50s. And nevertheless, the truth, if people want the truth, Gloria Steinem said, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. But it's time for people to, actually realize that this is something they have to take seriously. So now if you add those capabilities to holographic capability, scalar weapon capability, space-time systems where you can alter the flow of space-time in an area, which gets into some really, at the CIA they call this WSFM, weird science and frickin' magic. And this is the problem, I call it the big technology gap between what conventional Pentagon, Special Forces, Joint Staff, Senate Intel, Armed Services, House Intel, the President, National Security people, what they know and what this group has.
From these statements made by Dr. Greer, this is where we need to invoke the spiritual gift of discernment. You've now heard that this secret government is setting the stage for us to fear all aliens. Yet, this cadre of villains are the ones who are doing the abductions. They're carrying out unethical human experiments. And they're the group responsible for a number of the UFO sightings. This is so that when the time is right for them, they might deceive the globe into thinking that we are at war with extraterrestrials and that we must band together under their banner for protection. This is when they'll plan on usurping all power and authority from earthly governments and take away our liberties to worship God as we please and force their standards to achieve their self-interests. Luckily, we know, whether or not they are involved in Armageddon, that Christ will not permit their final victory. However, if we don't repent as a nation and learn to love God and our neighbors alike, we will become casualties of their deceit and oppression. Now contrast this to the state of the world during the millennium, when peace will abound and Satan will be bound. Isn't it logical that races from other planets who have this technology would yield it for good? It seems that they would have evolved to that level in order to even be able to visit us. In other words, if they had malevolent intentions, wouldn't they have blasted us or themselves away by now? It makes no sense to me that they wouldn't be anything other than peaceful beings. God will allow the wicked to destroy the wicked, but he would never put it in the hearts of any righteous group to destroy billions of innocents. The only time that God would allow complete destruction is if a society has ripened in iniquity to the point that the upcoming generation could have no hope of being taught how to become a righteous and holy people who depend upon God. Such was the case in the time of Noah, and when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. These civilizations were no longer capable of bringing up the next generation to serve God, nor to love their neighbors as themselves. In the next segment, Dr. Greer uncovers technologies that, if implemented, could do away with the need to rely on coal, petroleum, natural gas, electrical grids, and they would end world poverty. These developments have kept money in the hands of the 400 wealthiest families in the world at the expense of everyone else. This should be quite interesting.
Let's get into the Disclosure Project. For 100 plus years, advanced technology has been seized, isolated, and hidden away. This has suppressed the advancement of technology and human progress. The Disclosure Project archives include government documents from the United States, Canada, Australia, Russia, and the UK, 145 top secret facilities and base maps, 755 now, witness accounts from military, corporate, and government sources, 121 UFO crash retrievals.
Yep, that's all in our archive.
What is some of the 145 top secret facilities that you know about?
Well, you know, everyone talks about Area 51. That's an old one. It's still operational. And particularly, you know, S3, S4, Pahut Mesa, out in Groom Lake.
Are these in the U.S.?
Yeah, this is Nellis.
Okay.
You know, that one. And that's operational, has been since the 50s. A more state-of-the-art one is actually in the Dugway Proving Grounds, which is in Utah.
Is this the one that you disclosed at the conference?
Yes.
I'm going to put a picture up of it right now.
And so that facility, there's something called the Avery sector, A-V-E-R-Y, where there are these assets. There's an extraterrestrial vehicle that was being studied there when one of our witnesses, I think he was there in 2009, when that object had been downed. They're downed by these electromagnetic pulse weapons because the ET craft are completely electromagnetic. So, you know, a kinetic weapon would not be so effective, missile or a laser, but an electromagnetic pulse or scalar weapon stuns them and they'll come down. Sometimes they crash, sometimes they're intact. If they're intact, then you have the whole thing to study. And that's where this man was in a facility where they had an entire intact one. And then, you know, there's a vast underground facility there.
So they're downing these aircraft with basically a directed EMP weapon.
Yes, but are more sophisticated than the legal constitutional government would know about, because you're going to add to normal EMP, let's call it a supercharged part of it that's scalar, what I mentioned before, where it's a point that goes out longitudinally without the waveform.
Okay.
So that's why, you know, light propagates at 186,000 miles every second. These are not limited that way because it's a point that goes out straight line. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
So now you're bypassing, you're exceeding the speed of light.
It's essentially teleportation.
That's different. We'll get into that if you want to. But no, I'm talking about just a type of energy weapon. Mm-hmm. But it can also be used for communication. And I think in the old days, in the early 20th century, mid 20th century, there were people who stumbled across, and Tesla wrote about scalar waves.
So hold on.
Can be used for
this
other.
This isn't a point A to point B line. It's not linear. It's not a linear weapon. If I shoot a gun, the bullet goes, you can see it.
Right.
You know, and if I shot a laser, you could see it, you know, travel from point A to point B. Are you saying that these weapons do not?
Well, they go from point A to point B, but bypassing linear space-time, meaning they're in the entangled quantum.
Okay.
So quantum entanglement basically is where every point in space and time is connected through what's called quantum entanglement. Mm-hmm. So when you have a quantum scalar weapon, then you're able to target an object at multiples of the speed of light. And those weapons they're very dangerous because one of the things we have to be careful of is, while these civilizations that are extraterrestrial are, I mean, to me, they're the equivalent of Gandhi, that they haven't struck back at all. But I'll be honest with you, you know, the more these weapons get perfected and you get into multiple generations of them, the more humans are a risk to other planets.
Let's move into your new documentary, The Lost Century.
Sure.
It's all about advanced technology, how it's been around for over 100 years, but kept secret. 0-point energy, a lot of people call free energy, is also called the quantum vacuum. This would basically eliminate the need for fossil fuels, utilities,
wind,
everything.
solar,
winds. Every means to power that we have now would make it completely obsolete. It would be unlimited, clean, and free energy.
And we've had it for 100 years.
How did you discover this stuff?
Well, it was an outgrowth of me looking into the UFO UAP issue. Because once you realize these objects are real, three-dimensional, the very first question, actually, when I go up to Capitol Hill or someplace, I'll put up the footage that the Pentagon said, this is a real 3D object, infrared sensors, no heat, no jets, no rockets, and certainly no nuclear power plant on it, because, I mean, those things are hot, right? There have been nuclear-powered aircraft and satellites. But I said, how is that moving at those speeds and then straight up against gravity? This is the alternative energy and propulsion systems. So I always tell people, forget all the mythology and everything. It's an alternative energy system. Now, it's a very advanced one because it also flies. Now, to be really clear, I am not advocating the release of the things that fly yet. Why? It's a missile delivery system. So you don't really want to open source an electrogravitic anti-gravity system that allows terrorists in Mogadishu to get a dirty bomb over downtown DC in 2 or 3 seconds, right? No. But the things that would sit at your house, like your heat pump, all right, or in the hood of your car, that would run your car or your factory or your business or your home, those devices that are not things that fly, those are just pulling energy from the fabric of space-time around it. And physicists have estimated that the volume of space in a coffee mug has enough potential energy to boil off all the oceans of the world. Is that much latent energy. So tapping into it to run the entire United States, the whole world, be like taking a thimble of water out of the Great Lakes. So it is what, Tesla called it the infinite energy field. And it began to be discovered, if you look at it all the way back, but as soon as you step into the reality, the three-dimensional reality of these UAPs and UFOs, you immediately begin talking to people, and this is what happened to me in the early 90s, to people who know the physics of the energy systems, because these things are not using oil, gas, coal, nuclear, what have you. So it's a natural extension of the problem. And I point out to people, one of the central reasons for the secrecy that got out of control under Eisenhower's last 4 years as president was because once they realized how this works, they realized, the big industrialists and financial and global moneyed people, banking, this would be the end of that entire sector of the macroeconomic system. Well, that would have been great if it had been transitioned before I was born in 1955, because look at the world we have now. But it really could have started coming out in the early teens and 20s. If you look at the documentary, The Lost Century, the subcaption is, and how to reclaim it. We talk about how we need to come together as a people and develop these energy generation systems and open source them, meaning that it's no patent, no intellectual property held back at the first level of this, because the patent office will seize it. We prove that in the documentary. We have a national security order on a patent that a scientist I know submitted. We took his name off of it. So the question is, are there some people who can financially put up the funds, and it needs to be a substantial amount, 50 to 100 million to start, to create a high energy physics lab that develops this and gets it out to the public, no intellectual property holdback? Or if there was that much funds available, we could go to some of these scientists who probably have these and say, look, we want to just acquire this. Here's $10 million, now go and relax. Let us move this out to the public. You can't do it. Most of these engineers and scientists and inventors think they're going to do it the way they do a new software program. And they're going to try to monetize it through intellectual property protections and patent. You cannot do that with this because the system is so completely weaponized and corrupt. And I'm talking from the patent office on. That the only way to do it is to do an open source release of it massively through the internet blockchain. So that's what we're doing. But the technology, if you look at this documentary, you'll see this trajectory. There's a great photograph with Nikola Tesla with this engineer farmer, self-taught guy. I believe it was 1908 or 1902, the caption. And this guy had like an earth battery. He had some metallic stakes and wires in the ground. He was pulling resonant energy. He was running his farm.
Wow.
Even my father, I wasn't alive. He was born in 1916. This was before my dad, who was hand-to-hand combat in World War II with the Japanese amphibious landing unit. But I'm going, what the heck? We have our planet. Half the planet's population doesn't have indoor plumbing. 3 billion people have no way to cook their food. They're cutting down the rainforest. 3 billion. The biosphere, even if you don't think climate change is real, 5 million people die from breathing particulate matter, soot, all over the world from this noxious stuff we keep burning. Yeah. So we need to take care of our creation, the earth, and our future. And it isn't going to happen with a windmill and a solar panel. Believe me, no way you're going to run 8 billion people off of those technologies. We're going to have innovative, high-tech solutions to the energy and environmental and poverty problems.
I mean, look, I just want to backtrack on that real quick. When you're talking about people dying from inhaling these particles and these chemicals, this unfortunately is a touchy subject, the pollution and climate change. But what I can attest to that is 100% fact is what you just said. Because I've been to these parts of the world. Yeah. I've spent over a decade in these parts of the world. And you see all these veterans coming home, dying of weird cancers. Yep. And I can tell you, in the wintertime in Afghanistan, the soot is so thick in the air that if you go outside we're talking just 5 minutes, and you go back inside and spit in the sink, you're going to spit gray. Right.
But those fine particles get into your lungs and then your circulatory and heart and cause a huge number of problems. Not just cancers, but I'm talking heart, lung disease. So why are we doing that when these technologies have existed? Now, this same corrupt organization, because it doesn't just deal with one issue, have been responsible for basically vacuuming up all these technologies for 100 years. I know people personally who have been murdered because they had one. And it's because they, against my advice, AMA, against medical advice, against their own security interests, they wanted to keep it secret. And they thought they were going to be so clever, and they were going to outfox this big super state of thugs. I'm going, dude, you have no idea what you're up against here. And then they think they're going to do encryption and keep it secret. I'm going, oh my, you think this group needs to worry about an electromagnetic encryption when they can target a volume of space anywhere and extract anything being said? And I understand it, because if you're in the normal engineering world, you're not going to know this. It's hard to believe it. But I said, if you don't believe it, just wait. You're going to be dead or it'll be confiscated. You're lucky if all they do is come in and kick your door in, hit you with a national security order, and drag it off. That's your best case scenario if you do it the conventional way. So I go, look, it's like, what is that saying attributed to Einstein? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. The reason I can prove that the strategy most people use doesn't work is that we can prove these technologies have been around for over 100 years, and you and I are still tied into a coal-fired or gas-fired power grid, right? So if the conventional business and technology strategies were going to work, they would have worked before you and I were born. So we need to have different thinking about this strategically. So what we're saying is all of these technologies, if they're used for peaceful purposes, would really give us a whole new civilization. Beautiful. Now, the downside is, given what humans are, we like to take any new technological breakthrough and weaponize it. But the truth is, they've already done that. We've already weaponized these things.
How do you think that the anti-gravity technology that's using gravity as a power source, how is that happening? Do you have a brief explanation on?
I really think it's gravity control and gravity wave control. As for a power source, I think the power source was better described as this quantum vacuum energy or zero-point energy. But it's like two separate things but are related. So you can have a zero-point energy system or a free energy system. It doesn't move and it's not affecting gravity, but at a certain resonant frequency and power, and has to do with vortices, toroidal energy patterns, you can then cause what I call mass cancellation, where an object literally takes on weightlessness. Now, if you go back in the documentary, we touch on this, all the way back to T. Townsend Brown and what was later called the B-Phil-Brown effect. In the late 1920s, he took a very high voltage system at a very certain, with wires around a crystalline material, and it levitated, just floated. Now, that was almost 100 years ago, late 20s. That was then the Kautsky-Frost experiment in Germany, around the same time, confirmed it. Later, the whole B-Phil-Brown effect, studying very high voltage VHV systems, began to be increasingly studied and classified in the 30s and 40s. By the time World War II ended, Adolf Hitler had a disc-shaped electrogravitic, but it wasn't stable, which is why he could never use it in the war. But it was brought back to America by Paul Mellon and General Patton and Allen Dulles. So that device actually became a very important object to study at the end of World War II. And of course, that technology got advanced greatly by studying the extraterrestrial materials that we also were beginning to acquire by using electromagnetic weapons to down the ET craft. So you had two rivers of technology being developed from the 20s, 30s, 40s that intersected with the extraterrestrial technologies, and they hybridized them. So that's what happened between 1945 and 55, that decade.
How many different ways are there to harness this kind of energy?
Oh, I think there are dozens.
How did Tesla do it?
Tesla, I think, was actually capturing resonant magnetic field energy of the Earth that's almost boundless. So there are a lot of, quote, free energy approaches. I think the ones that use these very high voltage systems that create a sort of a vector, a tap, as it were, into this quantum vacuum energy and zero-point energy field, those began to be stumbled across, but sort of episodically as a phenomenon back in the late 1800s, because that was the heyday when they were first discovering electromagnetism. And I think Maxwell and Faraday, some of these guys stumbled across this, but they didn't know what it was. You were getting more energy out than you had to put in. So I think you can have a rotational coil-based device. Floyd Sweet, who we feature in the movie, had a solid-state device that was about this big that could run a 300 horsepower electric engine for your car. No other batteries, the little teeny...
you had video of that.
Yep, we have video of it. It was tested by a Lieutenant Colonel, Tom Bearden, who's a very dear friend of mine, just passed away. He handed off all of what he knew about this to us. We have a file that was a CIA operative named Sajaki that I knew, but he had a guy I know named John Bedini, who was allowed to copy a bunch of confiscated patents, and we have that disk. So we need to send up a research lab to do this and get to the bottom of it, I think, Sean, very quickly, because we need to do it. Look, if this technology came out in the next year or two by a group that could just put it out, open source it, thousands of companies would then adopt it, and we'd be able to really transform the trajectory of the planet. Now, there are going to be certain losers in that process. Like any new technology, oil, gas, coal, centralized public utilities, they'll all have to be retired. But keep in mind, it's going to take 15 years to do this. You know, your car and my car running, if you have a conventional vehicle, 100 million vehicles are made a year. There are 1.5 billion motor vehicles on the road worldwide. That's 15 years if you waved a magic wand and converted every manufacturing entity to a zero-point electric system. That's not going to happen. So, you know, it's going to take a couple of decades to make this transition anyway.
As I heard this next section, an epiphany occurred in my mind where I was able to begin to theorize, on some level at least, how the operation of prayer works. For God uses natural laws to fulfill his purposes that we may or may not understand. I guess it's the not understanding something that makes it a miracle. This is also probably the scientific basis where an omniscient and omnipresent God can see all things before him. Thus, he has all knowledge of the truth, of things as they are, as they were, and as they are to come. This truly blew my mind. Listen.
I would like to cover quantum of thought. Even though it's very unrelated to what we're talking about, it's a fascinating topic, and I want to dive into that.
Well, this is another whole show, and it's cool. So I always tell people, sort of the entry-level technological discussion on this is energy generation, propulsion, electrogravitics. The real amazing information has to do with what quantum physicists call entangled universe. You know, and actually Einstein called it the spooky effect, where the same particle could be in two places at once because of what's called non-locality, where basically we think in terms of a straight line, point A to B in the universe or in space here. In reality, there's an aspect of the cosmos that is entangled, where every point in space and time is intimately connected to every other, but not at the speed of light or what have you, but instantly. It's called entanglement. Now, the ultimate entangled field, or non-local field, is consciousness. The father of modern quantum mechanics, Erwin Schrödinger, particle wave theory, in 1908 said, the total number of minds in the universe is one. It's a singularity. So people talk about the singularity. This is the singularity. And it has to do with the consciousness field. So what extraterrestrial civilizations have for their communication systems, they're not going to pick up this thing, right, at the speed of light and go and communicate from, let's say you're from the Andromeda galaxies, 2.5 million light years from here.
It's too slow.
At the speed, this goes at the speed of light. Yeah. So at the speed of light, it'd take 2.5 million years for the signal to get there, and another 2.5 million years for the person to answer and say, yeah, I'm doing fine, how are you? It's 5 million years. So we know, and I knew this when I was 18 because I had a contact experience, that these civilizations have both innate remote viewing capabilities, but they have technologies that interface with that quantum field at the level of a quanta of thought. So not just random thought, but like directional, like if you're looking at the device and you think to it, it transmits to another node, another point. So now we've known this for decades in the CIA and other agencies, because when they started studying the devices, not just the propulsion systems and the energy, but how are these guys communicating? They found these devices. And to me, this is some of the most interesting research that no one ever talks about. But if you look at Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is our documentary about contacting and using this technique, the foundation of it is this. It's the science of consciousness and the science of the quanta of thought interfacing not only with each other, but dropping out of linear space-time. And so we call this trans-dimensional physics, physics across dimensions. And one of the dimensions is the so-called thought realm. And it's fascinating. And so now take that knowledge that maybe some mystics in India and the Vedas and meditation, I'll admit that before I was a medical doctor, I was a meditation teacher and studied all this. So I kind of after I had the contact experience. I went, what the heck? How did this happen? So I became a student of the ancient Vedas and Sanskrit and then meditation before I went into medical school. But interesting career track, huh? But unconventional. But what I learned was that this is how these civilizations are able to communicate in real time across 1 million light years of space.
Have you heard of string theory?
Yes.
Now, from what I've heard, the Chinese are claiming that they can communicate with their satellites through string theory. Do you?
It could be. I mean, I know that our intelligence community at the upper end of it, Deep Black, have systems that are interfacing with this technology.
We have this too?
Oh yeah, way back. That got perfected between 1956 and 1965.
Can you describe string theory?
Well, I'll let a physicist describe string theory, and some people don't think it's quite accurate. I think a more accurate view of it is what I'm calling non-locality. Okay. In other words, where in what's called entanglement, the interconnectivity. And this is why Ben Rich, who is the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, said, and I have 3 people who were there when he said it at a lecture, UCLA, School of Engineering. And he said, this is in, I believe, 95. And he had taken Kelly Johnson's place, who was founded the Skunk Works, the Lockheed Skunk Works, a U-2 spy plane, all that. And he said, someone asked, how would these extraterrestrial civilizations communicate? And he said, every point in space and time is connected to every other point in space and time, in real time, instantly. And that's how they're doing it, and it's through consciousness, through mind. And of course, everybody there was like, these are nuclear engineers and whatnot, and they're going, what? You know, that's true. So one of the things, I get ridiculed the most for the work I'm doing with contact and consciousness. What people don't realize, that is the deepest secret that they have on this. Because if people understand that, they can bypass any intelligence system and remote view and see, or they can contact these civilizations. Now, you have to be trained, you know, but so I train people with we have an app, it's called CE5 Contact app. And the CE5 Contact app, you know, there's millions of people using it now. And it's a whole training program on remote viewing, meditation, making how to do this. But the foundation of it is what you're asking about, and that's the technological interface that I don't have. We have classified projects that have some of this, but these other civilizations have. I remember talking to a McDonnell Douglas, became part of Boeing. One of their chief aerospace engineers is on my team, Dr. Woods. Very elderly now, but he was assigned by old man McDonnell Douglas, to look into this issue in the 60s. And he found cases where there were people who had contact with these extraterrestrial vehicles and the personnel, the beings. They're called EBINs, extraterrestrial biological entities. So the EBIN was there, and it had this little kind of black rectangular box. And it was used, so they didn't have to speak verbally like we are. It was kind of telepathic, but augmented with this technology. And it went back and forth that way. Now the human was just receiving it, but very clear. And then this EBIN was receiving it, probably innately, but assisted. So I call this consciousness-assisted technology, CAT. And then the reverse, technology-assisted consciousness, where the technology can help project your remote viewing capability. It goes both ways.
Really?
So let's say the guidance system on these interstellar vehicles, they can stand at a console and touch it or think to it and then navigate it. That's how it's done.
Wow.
We know how that's done.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, this is the really cool. To me, you know, this other stuff is like the introductory, but the stuff that really excites me is this.
Here are my thoughts. After researching for more collaborating evidence of these topics that Stephen Greer spoke about, I have concluded that many of his statements are verifiable. One only needs to study these sciences, research verifiable, unidentified anomalous phenomena, and investigate what other sources have said to confirm that he is not alone in his analysis of these topics. As a strong believer of Jesus Christ and of the Scriptures, I'd like to compare what we see going on in these latter days with what has been prophesied by prophets. As I've read the book of Revelation, it does not rule out that Gog, as spoken in Ezekiel, could be involved in a scheme to impersonate extraterrestrials. The fact is that the Scriptures spell out only that these prophecies will all be fulfilled, and that Satan will direct these last-ditch efforts to thwart Christ's plan of salvation. Furthermore, I personally do not believe that the earth has any imminent threat from extraterrestrial people. We have several risks from wicked people of human origin who follow Satan. Now, why would I rule out extraterrestrials as being involved in attempting to destroy the world? Well, it isn't because I don't believe that they exist. With trillions of stars and a universe that is being discovered as being more expansive each passing decade, it makes no sense that this world could be the only one that God created. In fact, in the book of Moses, as God revealed himself to Moses, God the Father said, "Worlds without number have I created, and by the Son I created them, which is mine only begotten." Because of this, it makes sense that we are not the first world that he created. As followers of Jesus Christ, we believe that God is a deity of order. He reveals sciences, technologies, and spiritual enlightenment as his children are ready to receive them. He deems our readiness to receive them when we can be trusted to use them in a righteous manner. Right now, many technologies appear to have been withheld from the world as a whole due to the avarice of corrupt people. We know that during the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, that exploitation will no longer exist. People will no longer pay for energy usage which God intended to provide to us all freely. In our current world of self-interest and possessing a scarcity mentality, the majority of Earth's inhabitants are in subjection to a few elites who hold wealth and power in a corrupt, man-made system that benefits the few extremely wealthy. This will all be done away with, of course, when Christ comes again. These other extraterrestrial societies have gone beyond where we are in our current development. They aren't motivated by greed or a desire to conquer. Their evolution as a society would have done away with such base aspirations. Thus, due to their technological advances, extraterrestrials would not harm us. With such a superior stage of development, where they understand eternal laws beyond the Newtonian ones that we generally comprehend, they have nothing to gain from conquering us. They understand the laws of quantum mechanics and physics. They grasp quantum entanglement and interdimensional processes. They have mastered the ability to travel at the speed of thought. They already embrace the need for peace. In fact, it has been documented that UFOs have appeared over nuclear missile sites and have disabled them. It makes more sense that they did this more so that we wouldn't destroy ourselves over the theory that they are disarming missiles so that we might not destroy them in some galactic battle. It is more likely that God blessed them with more advanced technologies because they have evolved into peaceable races, giving glory to the same God who created them. Therefore, if there is an attack on Earth by some UFOs, we should be more inclined to believe that these advanced crafts are of earthly origin and execution. Such actions would be unlikely to come from a more advanced civilization. So to further confirm how Dr. Greer compliments epiphanies being recently made, let's circle back to the UFO hearing with David Grush and the former Navy pilot Ryan Graves and retired U.S. Navy Commander David Fravor. There were a few things that the American society gleaned from this. First, These three men offered a united front. Thus, they're three witnesses explaining their understanding of this nation's predicament with respect to UAPs. Now, some of the ideas they put forth include that they believe that the government has covered up UAP sightings. There has been an increase of UAP detection since 2014 due to improved radar tracking instruments that have been deployed. It makes sense that more have been spotted due to the proliferation of next-generation detector technologies. Also, they all believe that UAPs might offer a possible threat. First, the technology found in UAPs is far superior to anything jet propulsion systems offer. These phenomena could literally fly in circles around anything jet propulsion has. Now, in making this admission, there was no differentiation between the UAPs being of extraterrestrial origin or of man-made creation. Thus, they followed basic logic in that anytime there's something that we do not understand, or that is more sophisticated, or that we don't recognize as being of earthly origin, we should proceed cautiously, because maybe it is a threat. Yet, I should also interject that where there has been so much fake news and disinformation, it's hard to believe that any of the atrocities reported have ever been from an extraterrestrial source. If there is a clandestine government who wants to fake an alien invasion, then it would make sense that they would create situations that cause fear among all nations of an extraterrestrial threat. Remember, in the document that was outlined earlier in this video, that faking of an alien invasion was part of the plan. These horror stories of abductions only promote distrust and malice toward unearthly beings. Thus, it would be in their best interest to promulgate these faked narratives. Now, another issue brought up in the hearing was that currently there is no reporting processes established for witnesses of UFOs to any agency. Thus, there are no means for two-way communication and no protections that are offered against management reprisal for those who witness these phenomena. In fact, most eyewitnesses of these phenomena are considered mentally unstable because of our culture of UFO denial. We only need to ask ourselves why 76 years after the Roswell incident that there is no plan in place for this. Now, the only reason I could come up with is because without a clear communication channel, greater confusion and disinformation will promulgate around the UFO topic. This explains the world's current state. Another thing brought out is Commander David Fravor gave testimony of a UAP sighting he had back in 2004. He personally witnessed a tic-tac shaped object. For several days, advanced radar technologies detected this object off the coast of Southern California, descending from 80,000 feet to 20,000 feet, hovering for hours, and then instantaneously going up to 80,000 feet to outer space. This happened for several days. When the Navy pilots received orders to investigate the UAP while at 20,000 feet, they observed white wave caps directly under the vehicle in an otherwise calm ocean. There were no wings or rotors to explain the craft's ability to navigate in the air. Fravor's jet took off from the USS Nimitz and flew over to investigate the craft. When the pilots were at 15,000 feet, the UAP craft descended to about 12,000 feet. It hovered around the jet for a few minutes before taking off to disappear into another direction. In 1 minute, the craft flew some 60 miles away, which represented an airspeed of 3,600 miles per hour, or Mach 4.69. The shocker? This case was never investigated further by the Navy or U.S. government. Rather, it was dropped without any interviews from the eyewitnesses, except for their original debriefing where the pilots reported their findings. This raised a concern to Fravor that there is no government oversight on the UAP program. My thoughts are that this lack of concern probably means that this object was already known by officials in the Black Ops program described by Dr. Greer, and they already knew that tic-tac shaped object appeared to be technology from another planet. And so they staged this event demonstrating another superior technology. This event alone raises the question regarding why the military-industrial complex has no oversight or reporting requirements to specific agencies or branches of the U.S. government. Why are there no checks and balances on taxpayer-funded projects? Because without such, organizations become rogue and develop into a power unto themselves. This is exactly what Eisenhower tried warning us about some 62 years ago. The next point that was brought up from the hearing came from Ryan Graves. He saw the radar images and the video of his UAP sighting and had the corroboration of 30 other eyewitnesses who glimpsed this same event. He would like to see the initiation of the reporting of these UAPs from all pilots and control tower facilities, both military and private. These objects have been detected within Category 4 conditions and have remained stable and have exited them at Mach 1.4 airspeeds. Now finally, David Grush did not see any UAP nor any non-human being, but he had vetted several eyewitnesses who had. In fact, he interviewed over 40 witnesses having first-hand knowledge of reverse engineering of UAP technologies and of retrieved crafts, and has assessed them to be credible. Unfortunately, he was denied access to see information on these particular projects. He has received exact locations from these sources as to where these facilities are located so that Congress might pass laws to uncover them and investigate further. Mr. Grush has also received retaliation for being a whistleblower, but he hopes to evoke change for greater transparency and true governmental oversight. So, if this shadow government wants to fulfill their plot to fake an alien invasion, they'll need to strike before Congress has time to act. There was more, of course, that was brought out, and I would recommend that everyone watch this hearing if they're interested in learning more about anomalous phenomena, or UFOs. This can easily be viewed by doing a Google search or a YouTube search on UFO Congress hearing. I might note that everything that was related from these gentlemen lines up perfectly with the statements that Dr. Greer has made over the past 30 years. Now, to switch gears again to see how we might reconcile all of this within a religious framework, let's go to a few more Bible passages. Now, could this secret government organization be what is revealed in the book of Revelation in chapter 13, verses 1 through 10, as the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns wearing 10 crowns? Most accept the connotation that this beast who is against Christ is the Antichrist. This is because one definition of the root of anti is to be against. John supported this characterization in 1 John 2:22, where he said, "Who is a liar? But he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is the Antichrist that denieth the Father and the Son." Unquote. I believe that this is true. And in verse 18 of the same chapter, he says, "Little children, it is the last time. And as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now there are many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time." Unquote. Here we learn that there are many Antichrists, but before the Savior comes again, there will be one last-ditch effort for the Antichrist to do harm. Yet, there is also another definition of anti that most of us gloss over. It signifies being in place of or replacing something. So as we put anything in place of Christ, we create a counterfeit for him or a substitute for him. Therefore, another way to discern an antichrist is to look at any organization that might want to replace the Savior and his designs to bring salvation to the human race. I would say that a man-made government that seeks to take over the world and to rule all is a counterfeit to the kingdom of God. Thus, it is the ultimate Antichrist. Then again, as we read Daniel 7:25, as he saw our day, he spoke of the Antichrist when he said, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given unto his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time." Unquote. This reference is just a Hebrewism that equals 3.5 years. So what we glean as we correlate these verses together is that for 3.5 years, this group with 7 main leaders or heads, with a coalition of 10 rulers, will have their reign of terror. In other words, it will be an abomination of desolation or an abomination that leaves desolate. This will culminate at the Battle of Armageddon when Christ shall appear to the Jews, and that nation will be converted to Jesus overnight. In chapter 7 of Revelation, John gives a definition of the symbols he used in chapter 13 on the verses that I just covered. There, referring to what will happen to the beast at the Battle of Armageddon, he says the following: "And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called, and chosen, and faithful. And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples, and multitudes, and nations, and tongues." Unquote. Now, the beast that was and is not could describe a great deception. An alien-like invasion could be classified as something that is, but really isn't, because it was faked by evil men trying to create a new world order by unifying our world against a common enemy. So it is possible that this fits the criteria that John wrote about, but the original instigators of this woe don't seem to fit the criteria of faking an alien invasion. The people initiating these wars will come from an entirely different part of the world. Now, this isn't to say that other players won't join in later. In fact, they will, but it is unknown from the scriptures exactly how it is to play out. We only know that the masterminds will be following the bidding of Satan. Let's read from Revelation to find out more. "I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men." Remember, according to John the Revelator, an angel can mean servants. Now, there are 4 countries attached to the Euphrates River. These are Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. In this case, John refers to the servants of darkness, or the angels of Satan, who will start this apocalyptic war. These are the photos of the current leaders of these countries. Of course, these angels don't necessarily have to refer to the leaders of those countries. The most infamous leaders of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and HTS also have strong presence in this region, and could all or individually be instrumental in pushing the boundaries of war. This sounds to me that it could take 13 months of planning for this desolation of war, and the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. And I heard the number of them, and thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth, and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. If we are watching world events unfold in the next little while, we will come to recognize this if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. John spoke of the abomination of desolation when the sixth angel sounds his trump. The timing would be 13 months and a day and an hour after the fifth angel finished sounding. Thus, another clue we have about this Antichrist is a bit terrifying. The counterfeit to Christ's kingdom will gain a footing for 3.5 years in a reign of terror and blasphemy, trying to create a new world order which doesn't include a belief in Christianity. During this time, a third part of the world's population will perish. As far as a new world order goes, many past presidents of the United States have alluded to it. George H.W. Bush and his son, George W. Bush, are two examples. George Sr. was the head of the CIA and the one that told Clinton that he should leave the subject of UFOs alone because he'll never be read into it. I suspect that President Bush was read into the plans in motion that have been spoken about in this video. This is probably why he was trying to set the stage for this future New World Order.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law.
It is also interesting that his son George W. Bush was the president during 9/11 and was the president who began the phase of the plan of fighting terrorists.
The terrorists are traitors to their own faith, trying in effect to hijack Islam itself. Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them. Now, this war will not be like the war against Iraq a decade ago, with a decisive liberation of territory and a swift conclusion. It will not look like the air war above Kosovo 2 years ago, where no ground troops were used and not a single American was lost in combat. Our response involves far more than instant retaliation and isolated strikes. Americans should not expect one battle, but a lengthy campaign, unlike any other we have ever seen. It may include dramatic strikes visible on TV and covert operations, secret even in success. We will starve terrorists of funding, turn them one against another, drive them from place to place until there is no refuge or no rest.
22 years later, this war effort has lost a lot of its steam, as demonstrated by the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan under the Biden administration last year. Now you have more information about this secret society and the improbability that their plan to take over the world has any reference to the marking of the sixth seal sounding his trump. I am not saying that they won't try and initiate their plans during this time of tribulation, but I am asking that you discern the truth if a so-called alien invasion occurs and there is a plot to unite under one power. If it is another organization other than God's kingdom, then it is a counterfeit. Then, during those 3.5 years of turmoil, you can recognize that they have been prophesied of, and that as children of the light, you won't be taken by surprise. Instead, you can prepare yourself spiritually to bask in the light of the gospel. You can remain strong by being more prayerful and by reading the scriptures with greater faith and sincerity than at any other time in your life. You can serve the distraught and come to aid those who are faltering. Coming closer to Christ now will offer the peace that Christ promised to his followers, and we will largely be protected from the judgments befalling those who have ripened in iniquity. May God grant us all the faith, patience, and endurance that will be needed as these prophesied events unfold. May we find joy in the knowledge that the Savior is coming soon, and may we look forward to this day with gratitude, knowing that the world will soon be changed into a paradisiacal state during the millennium when Christ will reign King of Kings. For if we are prepared, we shall not fear. Let's follow Christ and heed the voices of his prophets so that we will be protected to abide that day. This is my prayer in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.